Further debate? Recognize a member from Huron-Bruce.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First off, I'd like to say that I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the House today, specifically with regards to Bill 66, the Great Lakes Protection Act 2015. And as you know, I hail from the Great Riding of Huron-Bruce, and I know firsthand how important the Great Lakes are to our environment, our communities, as well as our economy. And, Mr. Speaker, if you should happen to be unfamiliar with the riding, the western side of Huron-Bruce is bordered by Lake Huron, and it extends from Grand Bend right through Goderich, Amberley, Kincardine, to the north side of Southampton. And we have a lot of activity that stems from that shoreline. And I think it's safe to say that we all care about our Great Lakes here in Ontario and as MPPs for this amazing Legislative Assembly. And it's important to recognize that all Great Lakes have a significant impact on our daily lives of Ontario residents. And, you know, it's interesting, I heard the Minister of Environment and Climate Change speak to the importance of our waters being drinkable, swimmable, and fishable. And it reminds me of the number of deputations that we had a couple of weeks ago. And I just want to give a moment's recognition to all of the stakeholders that took time to travel to Toronto or travel to Queen's Park and make sure their voice was heard. I appreciate that very much. And there was one deputation that I was taken with, and it came from Lake Ontario Waterkeeper. And I just want to quote part of the deputation, the submission that was included with it. And the Waterkeeper of Lake Ontario said, "You should not pass the Act because environmentalists support it. You should pass the Act because it is the smartest investment in this province's future that a government can make." Well, Speaker, that comment stuck with me because we do want to make smart investments. And reflecting on the ability of this government to get Bill 66 right worries me a little bit, because did we see a smart investment when it came to Orange, e-health, gas plants, etc.? I'm afraid not. So we do have to take time to really make sure we understand the ramifications proposed through Bill 66, because the implications and ramifications are so far-reaching. And I just want to start off in terms of working our way through the particular bill in sharing Section 1. And it says, Bill 66 is geared to protect and restore the ecological health of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin and to create opportunities for individuals and communities to become involved in the protection and restoration of the ecological health of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin. And Speaker, I would suggest to everyone in the House today to please remember the specific statement as we proceed, particularly that statement's allusion to individuals in community involvement, because as we heard from various stakeholders and as we've done our homework and our research on Bill 66, we worry about that very thing. But I'll come back to that in a few minutes later. Right now, I would like to take a look at protecting Ontario's natural landscape and resources. And I don't think anyone here today would deem the concept of protecting our Great Lakes unworthy. But it's Bill 66 in its totality that causes one to worry. For instance, it's interesting because when we were working through over the last couple of weeks, clause by clause, Bill 66, we found it very disappointing, we being the PC Party of Ontario, that the Liberals failed to seriously consider 6 key issues that we highlighted in this current bill. And we identified that this bill could very well strip local autonomy away. We also recognized that this bill could very well introduce yet more red tape that would further burden municipalities as well as Ontario taxpayers and stakeholders. We also are concerned that with regards to the geographically funded initiatives, geographically focused, that's a Freudian slip, Speaker, because the GFIs, geographically focused initiatives, don't have any funding details attached to them. And it makes us worry that where is this money actually going to be coming from? Another significant issue that we touched on was the development of industrial wind turbines. Speaker, we were very adamant in our amendments that we did not want to see further development of a type of energy source that's not needed in Ontario. We did not want to see that develop in our Great Lakes. And guess what happened, Speaker? The Liberal government voted that particular amendment down. We also were concerned about the lack of respect demonstrated for landowners. And we also reminded the government that during Roma and Good Roads, the Premier herself touted the relevance and the importance of applying a rural lens to every piece of legislature, to make sure that it was relevant and not a burden or redundant with regards to other legislation that was already in place. But yet, again, there was a trend here, Speaker. They totally ignored that as well. And so I worry, is this government just about talking the talk and they will not walk it? Because at the end of the day, the cost of just talking the talk will be borne by Ontario taxpayers. This past March, I have to reflect on the fact that I reached out to 444 municipalities in Ontario, and I sent them a letter on behalf of my caucus members in the PC party. And I explained to them our position on Bill 66. And Speaker, I'm really pleased to share with you that people understood and appreciated the outreach that I did. I also sent with this letter highlights of what the rural lens truly represents. And the fact of the matter is, this government needs to pull up its socks because people are watching and they're concerned that they will not recognize what will happen with redundant legislation. So I want to talk a little bit more about our local municipalities. They're fully aware, in terms of protecting our Great Lakes, that they must act as responsible stewards of such a valuable resource. And you know what? They've already been taking steps to do just that. And even everybody knows, residents throughout Ontario understand the importance of the Great Lakes alone. But under the current framework of this bill, loopholes allow much of local municipal autonomy to be stripped away. And now, before I get too far on this, I just want to share with everyone that this morning we met with representatives of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. We met with mayors from across Ontario and our neighbouring states, and they said and shared key messages that demonstrated how they want to see this government care for our Great Lakes. In fact, I believe the phrase that was used over and over again was, they want to make sure that we as opposition hold this government to account with regards to phosphorus loading, the management of Phragmites, the loss of autonomy and what the cost of any ill-advised schemes might cost municipalities. And they also are very concerned that their voices are not being heard and they're not at the table being consulted with. So there's a lot to talk about in that regards. But I go back to that very first section in Bill 61, that very first section of Bill 66, where they being the Liberal government, said individuals and communities must be consulted. And in fact, it was interesting, during our meeting today, Mayor Randy Hope from Chatham-Kent specifically stressed the need for inclusion and public consultations, particularly with residents and elected officials from the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin areas. And Speaker, I think it's safe to say that we know consultation in this regard was very limited. And in fact, we heard through many deputations that the local voice should be a #1 priority. And time and again, stakeholder after stakeholder said a couple of weeks ago that to deal with the Great Lakes properly, we should not have a guardian council. We should have regional councils that understand the local issues, that understand the local ecological health of each of their respective lakes, so that we can move forward in protecting our Great Lakes. But alas, as I said, one of our concerns in this bill is the striking of a guardian council, the hand-selected guardian council. And who's hand-selecting this guardian council? Well, it just so happens to be the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Do we trust that hand selection? Absolutely not, because look what happened when there was a small group of people making a decision that had far-reaching impacts. And in this example, I'm talking about neonicotinoids. A small group made a big decision that will have lasting, far-reaching negative financial impacts on the farming community in this province. We can't let that happen again. We should not be allowing a small group, like a hand-selected guardian council, making decisions over all of our Great Lakes. Do you know, Speaker, under Bill 66, it says that interested parties must consult with the minister and receive approval for geographically focused initiatives at the proposal stage. Thus, interpreting that, you would think that the minister may very well be in a position to influence the proposal from its inception. And the proposal is to include a description of the costs and benefits, as well as the strategy to finance the project. And it's the minister who ultimately decides on the initiatives after consulting with the other Great Lake ministers. And again, a small hand-picked group may set targets relating to the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin and loss of wetlands. And again, we hear that all initiatives should be geographically focused. But, Speaker, this is where we have yet another concern. And we concur with the deputations that came in to Queen's Park to share that they are concerned about targets. Where are these targets coming from? Again, when you take a look at what happened with the neonics and the ban that was implemented, those targets came out of those aspirational targets came out of nowhere. Was the industry that was completely affected by this aspirational target? Were they consulted? Absolutely not. And where is that particular sector? Well, they've gone to court seeking a stay of the regulations. This is the direction this government is going. Aspirational or not, it's the wrong direction, and they should be ashamed of what they're imposing. You know, it's an interesting time because as we take a look at our Great Lakes, we want people at our local level making a difference. The Georgian Bay Association, during deputations, Minister, said they were looking for bottom-up leadership. Does that sound like a hand-selected guardian council to you? I think not. And it was also interesting, there was another deputation from the foundation, the Sierra Club of Canada. They shared that in terms of wetlands along Lake Erie, there are only 2 wetlands left. 2 wetlands. Now, some people in this House may not fully comprehend the significance of wetlands, but if there's only 2 left, do you think a guardian council handpicked by the minister here in Toronto really will understand what's needed to protect those wetlands? I think not. It should be local people around the shoreline of Lake Erie. Another deputation was shared from Nature Canada, and I was taken by their deputation as well, because they talked about protecting and restoring the natural habitats and biodiversity of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin, including critical habitat areas for migratory birds, bats, and insects, such as important bird and biodiversity areas. Well, interesting, Speaker, that this concern should be considered when it comes to protecting the Great Lakes. Why isn't it being considered in Prince Edward Hastings with regards to the development of industrial wind turbines? Speaker, we need to be listening more to our local stakeholders who care and take time to exercise their voice. I worry that the whole purpose of a Guardian Council the whole purpose of it is to stifle that voice and to browbeat. But, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I think we know that local autonomy is very, very important, as are our stakeholders. And we on this side of the House, in opposition, feel that Bill 66 is the wrong direction when it comes to protecting Ontarians and our Great Lakes in that regard. And, you know, it's interesting when we talk about industrial wind turbines. Again, I want to revisit the fact that while we are going clause by clause in committee, the Liberal government specifically voted against an amendment that we put forward prohibiting the development of industrial wind turbines in the Great Lakes. Speaker, I had the wonderful opportunity to represent Ontario at the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus just a couple of weekends ago with the member from Kingston and the Islands, as well as Speaker Levac. And it was held in Buffalo. And we had a wonderful introduction of how they are working through reclamation of their lake shore. We've seen the wonderful work they're doing in terms of their brownfields. And I asked a representative of the Buffalo Riverkeeper what would happen if somebody tried to propose industrial wind turbines in Lake Erie. And she said unequivocally there'd be a lot of trouble raised because turbines do not belong in the Great Lakes. And I hope with all my heart that this stays true for every riding in Ontario. I'm hearing a comment shared that they tried it in Scarborough, but it became an election issue, and they tried it at Kingsville. But when it becomes an election issue, Speaker, of course, it went nowhere. But when it's all said and done, I think we have to recognize that this bill is nothing but environmental photo ops, and the geographically focused initiatives, if they're top-down and not locally driven, may lend itself to more environmentalism photo ops. And I'm concerned about that because I'd like to take my final minutes in this debate to revisit the fact that OFA, Ontario Federation of Agriculture, in their deputation shared that the Great Lake Protection Act replicates existing laws. Environmental Protection Act, Ontario Water Resources Act, Nutrient Management Act, Pesticide Act, Clean Water Act, Drainage Act, Lakes and Rivers Improvement Act, Endangered Species Act, and Planning Act and associated provincial policy statements. In fact, the Federation of Agriculture went on to share that there was a lot of redundancies. For instance, the Environmental Farm Plan purpose statement is to provide for the protection and conservation of the natural environment. It is intended to be very broad in scope. The Ontario Water Resources Act purpose statement is to provide for the conservation, protection and management of Ontario's waters and for their efficient and sustainable use in order to promote Ontario's long-term environmental, social and economic well-being. And the purpose of statement for Bill 66 is quite straightforward, to protect and restore the ecological health of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin. Well, Speaker, there's redundancy time and time again, and that's what we've tried to demonstrate during first reading, second reading, by the introduction of our amendments that we made in committee, as well as our debate here today in third reading. If we are truly meant to be protecting our Great Lakes, Bill 66 needs to be stronger. It needs to be stronger because from a local level, the community of Ajax, for instance, in their deputation, suggested that we should be taking a look at the cladophria issue that is generated from phosphorus overloading. And we also should be taking a look at the community from Georgian Bay with Phragmites. They have an issue whereby Phragmites is invading their water intake. And if they don't get that under control, they may have no other option than to extend their water intake. This is a municipality, particularly in the Georgian Bay area, that represents 10,000 people. To extend that water intake, it'll cost $10 million. How on earth are municipalities going to afford that? So we need to be very, very careful when we talk about protecting our Great Lakes and understand the economic impacts that ultimately will be burdened onto the people at the local level that will make a difference. We cannot support a bill that strips away local autonomy, that refuses to protect our Great Lakes against industrial wind turbines, and refuses to listen to our local voices because of that concept of a guardian council. We cannot leave that much power in the hands of a select few. And at that, I will share the rest of my time with my colleague from York Simcoe. Thank you.